Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight we lead with Saudi Arabia. Oil giant, Islamic leader, Saudi Arabia now wants to become a footballing superpower. Some of the biggest names in world football have been bought by Saudi clubs. Yes, this is about sports washing, but there's so much more to it. The politics, the economics, and the impact on the sport itself. Tonight we'll discuss all of it, the rise and rise of football in Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, in the war, Ukraine may be bracing for another twist. Will its allies ask Kiev to give up territory to Russia in return for a NATO membership? We'll tell you where this comes from and what it means. India is looking to buy submarines and European powers are jostling to get the deal. Pacific nations are caught in a turf war between China and the West. Vanuatu's Prime Minister has barely survived a trust vote. Fiji is doing a tough balancing act. In Pakistan, elections may be pushed to February. Enough time to get Nawaz Sharif back in the country. In Niger, are the coup leaders clearly getting support from Russia now? And India is the biggest market for smart watches in the world and among the biggest for wearables. We'll bring you the numbers and the trends, the headlines first. In Pakistan, a mob sets at least 4 churches on fire. The attacks come after a Christian family was accused of desecrating the Quran. The incidents took place in Faisalabad city in eastern Pakistan. Just last week, a teacher was shot dead in the Kech district over allegations of blasphemy. Thailand's court dismisses election winner Pita's thwarted bid to become Prime Minister. This clears the way for a new leadership vote in Parliament. Thaksin Shinawatre's Pheu Thai party is now set to lead a coalition government. Thailand has been gripped by political deadlock since elections in May. The Dutch economy slips into recession. It contracts for the second consecutive quarter. The Netherlands is the Eurozone's 5th largest economy. Meanwhile, Hungary remains in recession, contracting for the 4th straight quarter. Germany approves a draft law to legalize cannabis. It allows adults to possess up to 25 grams of it. They can also grow up to 3 plants for personal use. The bill still needs Parliament's approval. With this, Germany will have one of the most liberal cannabis policies in Europe. The Bank of Ireland apologizes for a technical problem. The glitch allowed customers to withdraw or transfer more money than what their accounts had. Some customers with no money in their accounts could withdraw up to $1,000. Now that's a glitch most of us would not mind. But no glitch in England's performance at the Women's Football World Cup. They defeat co-hosts Australia to reach the final. The Lionesses have done what their male counterparts have not been able to since 1966. England will take on Spain for the title on Sunday. What comes to mind when I say football? Maybe the blue and white of Argentina or the yellow of Brazil. But what about the deserts of Arabia? We know they have oil. We know they have money. But now they also have football. The Saudi Pro League is the talk of the town. They have signed some big names, and I mean big. The latest is Brazilian star Neymar. He will be playing for Al Hilal of the Saudi League. Guess how much he's being paid for this? $100 million per year. Sums up Saudi Arabia's plan to dominate football. Make a deal they can't refuse. Let me show you what the roster looks like. The biggest name is Cristiano Ronaldo. He plays for Al Nassr. Then you have Karim Benzema, N'Golo Kante, Fabinho, Sadio Mane, Riyad Mahrez. These are all the biggest names in football. All of them play in Saudi Arabia now. And age is an issue here. Most of these players are past their prime, but Saudi Arabia would not mind that. Their primary focus is attention and popularity. Quality can follow. Just think about it. I'm sure some 20-year-old wonder kid from Brazil can outplay Mane or Ronaldo. But who would you pay to watch? A would-be talent or Cristiano Ronaldo? That's what Saudi Arabia is counting on. They have a great market for football. Around 70% of the population is under 35 years of age. They're young and they like the game. Plus, they're affluent. They can afford expensive tickets. So financially, it makes all the sense in the world. Football is part of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030. He wants to shift the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia away from fossil fuels. Football could be one way. He has set some targets as well. One is to triple the league's market value to reach $2 billion in valuation. For context, the English Premier League is worth $17 billion, so it is a long way to go. The second target is quality. The Saudi League ranks 58th on football quality. MBS wants to break into the top 10. Again, a long way to go. But Saudi Arabia's football ambitions are not just financial, it's more political. You normally associate this country with three things: desert, oil, and a lack of human rights. MBS wants to change that perception. He wants his country to become a global stage, not just for sports, but for everything. This month, they hosted peace talks, a peace dialogue to end the war in Ukraine. Imagine that, a peace talk in Saudi Arabia. MBS wants his country to become the go-to place for football, for technology, for diplomacy, for everything. Is that really a good thing? We'll get to that question later. First, let's focus on Saudi Arabia's plan. How will they challenge the well-established leagues of Europe? They're thinking of 3 steps. They're on the first step right now, getting the big names. Unlike in Europe, Saudi Arabia does not have spending limits. It's a seemingly bottomless pit of money. Clubs can pay as much as they want. It also helps that 4 of the biggest clubs are owned by the sovereign fund, meaning the royal family. This equation helps to remove roadblocks. Consider what happened to Cristiano Ronaldo. He has a long-time partner, but he's not married to her. Now, normally Saudi Arabia would frown upon this. You can't live in with your partner in this country. But Ronaldo is doing exactly that. How is he doing it? Because the royal family has exempted him. Step number 2 is infrastructure. Top players need top stuff, whether it's gyms or stadiums or playing services, they need the best of them. Saudi Arabia is building those too. Since 2021, they have invested $6 billion on sports infrastructure. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but the Saudi Sovereign Fund manages $600 billion. They must have barely noticed the $6 billion bill. All these investments are aimed at Saudi Arabia's grand plan to host the FIFA World Cup. Reports say they could bid for the 2030 edition, the 2030 FIFA World Cup. If they do, expect Qatar on steroids. And unlike Qatar, Saudi Arabia in fact has a good team. They defeated Argentina in last year's World Cup, the only team to do so, which brings us to the final step, and that is appeal. People won't come just for football. They need to feel safe and welcomed in the country. How do you do that? By making footballers say and do the right things. Lionel Messi is the ambassador for Saudi tourism. Ronaldo is effectively ambassador for the Saudi League. His team won the Arab Club Championship last week. You should have seen Ronaldo's reaction. He was calling the club owners on the field, clicking pictures with them. It felt like he'd won the Champions League. And that's what Riyadh wants. The kingdom knows that there is stigma. People are apprehensive about traveling to Saudi Arabia. Unless that changes, they cannot become a footballing power. And whether you like it or not, there are 2 sides to this story. Saudi Arabia could make football more accessible to a lot of people. Think of Ronaldo and Ronaldo fans in Bangladesh or Indonesia. How many of them could have flown to Italy or Spain to see him play? Very few. But Saudi Arabia seems more achievable. It brings football closer to the biggest market in the world, and that market is Asia. Having said that, it's problematic too. Saudi Arabia is a closed society with few human rights. If you talk about their football, you're not talking about their rights. It's called sports washing. Using sports to cover up your problems. China does it, Qatar does it, and Saudi Arabia is doing it now. And yet there is a difference. No one is spending the sort of money that Riyadh is. And they have to. If you're challenging centuries-old football leagues, you need big pockets. You also need patience. The Premier League was not built in a day, and neither will the Saudi League. But write them off at your own risk. The world did the same during Saudi Arabia's golf takeover, and look what happened. They've effectively bought global golf. Money may not catapult Saudi Arabia to football superpowerdom, but it will make their journey a lot easier. Now let's talk about the war in Ukraine. A few weeks back, Kiev launched a counter-offensive, did not achieve very much. It has descended into a stalemate, a frozen conflict. Ukraine's Western allies see this. A few days back, they tried a peace dialogue, the one in Saudi Arabia. Again, did not achieve much. So now the Western camp seems to have changed tack. They're sending out feelers again. They want to know the cost of a settlement. What will be the price tag? If the war were to end today, what will it take? That's what the West wants to know. Perhaps a sacrifice from Ukraine. That's what they're hinting at. Ukraine should be prepared to give up land. It's a big ask, considering we know Ukraine's stated position. They want all the territory captured by Russia to be returned to them. That's what Ukraine wants. They also want a complete integration with the Western Bloc, aka full NATO membership. That is Ukraine's wish list. But is the NATO prepared for this? Unlikely if you look at their latest statement. It comes from a man called Stian Jennison, the Chief of Staff of NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg. He has floated a suggestion. He says Ukraine should give up some land to be able to join the NATO. A Norwegian newspaper reported these comments. We have a copy. The statement is unambiguous. Listen to what it says. I think a possible solution for Ukraine could be to give up the territory in exchange for NATO membership. I'm not saying it has to be exactly like that, but it can be a probable solution. Classic kite flying. He's also made some revelations. He said the discussions have begun, that key stakeholders in NATO are involved in these discussions. They're discussing Ukraine's prospects vis-a-vis NATO. Can it join the alliance? With what kind of status and so on? These are the questions they're deliberating upon. So will they encourage Ukraine to cede territory? Well, Jennison did not say that. He said it was up to Kiev to decide when the talks should begin, under what conditions, and what the terms of negotiation should be. But will ceding territory be a part of this conversation? Other NATO members are asking this question, at least behind closed doors. They're raising this question. What about Ukraine? What is their reaction? Kiev is obviously unhappy. It has slammed the idea. An advisor to Zelensky has called it, quote-unquote, ridiculous. Listen to the full statement. I'm quoting again. That means deliberately choosing the defeat of democracy, encouraging a global criminal, preserving the Russian regime, destroying international law, and passing the war on to other generations. That is Ukraine's response. They refuse to give up land, at least for now, and they remain stuck in the conflict. With all the Western weapons and support Ukraine has got over the last 1 year, it has not been able to make the gains it hoped to. The likes of America are now saying this openly. Last month, the Pentagon said that Ukraine's counteroffensive is moving slowly.
Things are going a little slower than some had hoped. There are very high expenditures of artillery right.
Despite this assessment, they gave more support to Kiev. In fact, the US made a controversial move. It gave cluster bombs to Ukraine. Even that did not help. The West wanted to see gains on the battlefield. So far, they've given more than $80 billion in military assistance to Kiev. But look at the map of Ukraine. It hasn't changed very much. Russia still controls about 11% of Ukrainian territory. After the much-hyped counteroffensive, Ukraine has managed to regain only 3% of the lost land. And the big prizes still remain with Russia: Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and most of the Donbas region, all under Russian control. The counteroffensive was supposed to change this map. It was supposed to force the Kremlin to the negotiating table. That has not happened. Now, the West cannot keep signing blank checks. They will have to reassess their options. Zelensky may want to keep the war going. He may even want to launch another counteroffensive next spring. But will his allies support him? The US is already under pressure. Recently, a poll was conducted. Americans were asked about their government aid to Ukraine. The results are telling. 55% Americans opposed the idea of more aid. They did not want more American money to be spent on this war in Ukraine. That's a worry for Kiev and an opportunity for Moscow. They're holding a defense exhibition as we speak. It's happening in Kubinka. Among the exhibits is this: Western weapons apparently seized by Russian forces in the battlefield. They look heavily damaged. The Russian defense minister who was at this event had this to say about these weapons.
As for the Western-made weapons supplied to Ukraine, I want to emphasize once again that there is nothing unique and invulnerable about them to Russian weapons on the battlefield today. In many cases, even Soviet-made equipment surpasses Western models in its combat qualities.
So Russia is building a new narrative and Ukraine is struggling on the battlefield. Is Zelensky prepared to sacrifice territory to join the NATO? A lot will depend on how his forces perform in the days ahead. And speaking of weapons, two Western nations are vying for India's attention, Germany and Spain. They're eager to sell submarines to India. New Delhi plans to buy 6 submarines. It'll be a contract worth $4.8 billion. And who are these contenders? The first bid came from Germany, from a company called ThyssenKrupp AG, and their Indian partner is Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders. They're based in Mumbai. The second bid is from Spain. Their company is called Nevantia. They have a partnership with Larsen & Toubro. So which way is New Delhi leaning? Well, it's too early to say. India is weighing its options. It has spelled out its requirements. On top of India's wish list is technology transfer. India wants the maximum possible transfer. So it comes down to the bidders really. Whoever puts the best deal on the table and offers the biggest tech transfer will walk away with the deal. What kind of submarines are these? These are conventional subs. Usually, these are run on diesel. They have electric motors. They're different from nuclear submarines, nuclear-powered submarines. They cannot stay submerged for long. They need to resurface quickly to refuel. Nuclear-powered submarines can stay underwater for longer periods because they can refuel with nuclear power. It's not an option with conventional subs. But they do have other benefits, their own benefits. Conventional submarines are small, they can carry ballistic missiles, even nuclear warheads. And they're cheaper to maintain. All major navies in the world have conventional submarines. In fact, most of their fleet is made up of such subs, so it makes sense for India to invest in them too. The Indian Navy has a roadmap for this. India needs a fleet of 24 submarines. 18 will be conventional, 6 will be nuclear ones. And what do we have right now? As of December last year, India had a total of 16 submarines, all but 1 conventional. So 15 conventional and 1 nuclear submarine. It's called Arihant. Now, most of this fleet is aging. They will go out of service in a few years. Many of them are more than 30 years old. So they're likely to be decommissioned soon. The Navy is planning to upgrade and push for upgrades across the board. In fact, for the conventional subs, India wants them equipped with a different technology. It's called air-independent propulsion. What does it do? It improves endurance of the submarine. It also helps them stay underwater for longer. The machines that don't have this system must surface daily. This technology enables them to spend up to 1 week underwater at a stretch. Earlier this year, India signed a deal. It was with France. This was to upgrade existing submarines. They're all getting the air-independent propulsion system. The system will be built in India and France will help in its integration. As for the nuclear submarine Arihant, it is based on a Soviet design and it has some issues too. A report came out in 2019. It said the maiden deterrent patrol of this submarine lasted just 20 days. Experts say there are endurance issues too. Nuclear submarines are designed to stay underwater for much longer than this, sometimes months, even years if needed. They run on a nuclear reactor, so they get uninterrupted power supply. The only limitation perhaps is the supplies, the food and water for the crew. That needs to be replenished. The Indian sub seems to have been found wanting on these counts, so India is talking to France for an upgrade. We told you about this last month. When Prime Minister Modi visited Paris, there was talk of a possible deal, but no announcement has been made yet. Reports say the agreement is yet to be sealed, the negotiations are still on, the European powers need the Indian defense market. But India too needs these deals to be able to maintain an optimal level of deterrence. The present fleet is not good enough. Like I said, India has 16 subs. Do you know how many China has? 66. And they're building more. What about Pakistan? Their navy has 8 submarines. All of them are conventional ones. Rawalpindi too is pushing for modernization. It is said to be getting 8 new subs from China. We don't know who is going to pay for them. But we can see that the high seas could be the next battleground. The Indian Navy will need more firepower, and submarines are a good place to start. For our next story, we take you to the Pacific Ocean, to the island nations of Vanuatu and Fiji. They're caught in a turf war between China and the West. We'll start with Vanuatu. It's a nation made up of about 80 islands. It's home to about 300,000 people. The Prime Minister is under fire. His name is Ismail Kalsakau. Yesterday, he barely survived a no-confidence motion. What for? For compromising Vanuatu's neutral status. And how did he do that? By signing a security pact with Australia. This moved Vanuatu closer to the West. It also upset China and compromised Chinese funding for the country. Now, this Chinese funding is very important. The Prime Minister knows this. So he has tried some damage control. There was a cabinet reshuffle. There were some interesting statements. Vanuatu has a new deputy Prime Minister and he's been singing China's praises. The Prime Minister too posted something on Facebook recently, a thank you note to China for sending a hospital ship. It was greeted with much fanfare. So you see what's happening here. The Prime Minister is trying to strike a balance, but pro-China leaders in the opposition went after him and almost succeeded. The PM lost the no-confidence vote 23 to 26, but luckily for him, the opposition did not get the minimum 27 votes needed to force him out, so he survived by a whisker. And yet this episode shows China's influence in Vanuatu. The Prime Minister is not out of the woods yet. More challenges will follow. He'll have to watch his back. Meanwhile, in neighboring Fiji, an unusual defense summit is taking place. It's their 25th annual defense meet. 25th. So why unusual? Because of the attendees. The summit is being co-hosted by Fiji's military forces and the US Pacific Command. They've invited a total of 33 countries. Among them is China. It's a strange situation if you picture it. American generals in beach shirts talking about the Chinese threat in the Pacific and a deputy chief of staff of China's Central Military Commission taking notes. What happened, jokes aside, neither China nor the United States commented on whether they'll hold bilateral talks. So then what are Chinese forces doing in Fiji? Fiji's Prime Minister, Sitiveni Rabuka, gave the opening speech at the summit. He said, the Pacific should be a zone of peace. In fact, let me quote from that speech. Only by fostering trust and dialogue can we overcome the complexities of an interconnected world. A noble sentiment. It sounds like a bid to stay neutral. Prime Minister Rabuka also said something else on his Facebook post. We must seize this opportunity to adapt, to modernize, and to forge new partnerships. Is he talking about all nations becoming friends and getting along? Or is he talking about Fiji forming new partnerships with China? You see, in the beginning of this month, Fiji and China conducted what they called a comprehensive security review. Fiji's Home Minister spoke about fostering trust and collaboration between the two countries. Their police forces already collaborate. They conduct joint training sessions, also joint patrols. It's one of the many signs of Fiji's pivot towards China, and now they've invited China to a defense summit with America. What does it tell you? That there is a turf war in the Pacific. The US and China are fighting for influence, and island nations are being forced to pick sides. Their politics is being shaped by their allegiance to either power. China has been using its checkbook diplomacy to win friends. It has been worming its way into Pacific politics, trying to sign security pacts with the island nations and trying to wean them away from Western partnerships. Pacific nations have traditionally been in the Western sphere of influence, under the military umbrella of the US, which, by the way, has multiple bases in the region. It's been that way for decades. But China's latest moves are upsetting the balance. They're forcing the West to match the outreach. So the Americans are sending delegations. Australia too has stepped up. It's acting like a regional hegemon. The recent security pact with Vanuatu is proof. But is this a case of too little too late? Can the West still keep a hold of its Pacific allies? Or has China successfully embedded itself too deep into the region? Or better still, can the Pacific Islands benefit from this attention rather than being caught in a proxy war? The weeks and months ahead should reveal the answers. On to Pakistan now. Their general elections may not be happening this year. That's right. After all the hue and cry, after all the arrests and crackdowns, the polls may not even happen. We are not the ones saying this. Their former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is. He's sitting in exile in London, but all his attention is back home. Nawaz Sharif, as many of you would know, is the chief of the ruling party in Pakistan, the PMLN, Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz. A leader from his party was asked about the possibility of his return, and this is what he said. I'm quoting, Nawaz Sharif is sure that elections will take place in February. Delimitation of constituencies has to be completed before then. Two questions here. Why would the elections be delayed? And when will Nawaz Sharif return? Let me answer the first question first. Elections will be delayed because of the census. Pakistan carried out a digital census in the month of May this year. The population count, the age count, all of it. Now, after each census, the government has to notify it. When did the Shehbaz Sharif government do that? When did they notify the census? In the first week of August. So now there is work to be done. If the population has changed, constituencies must be redrawn or in some cases expanded. All of this could take around 4 months. And in case you're wondering, no, this is not optional. The Election Commission cannot hold elections with outdated numbers. So what's the way out? The Sharifs seem pretty clear about it. Finish the update, then conduct the election. Of course, they would say that. They need more time to set the stage for Nawaz Sharif's return. Pakistan may call this a technicality, but let's be clear, this is a subversion of democracy, or at least whatever was left of it, of their democracy. Pakistan's parliament dissolved last Wednesday, so elections should have been held within the next 90 days, meaning sometime in November. That's when they should be held. This is what the law says. But if you're redrawing constituencies, forget about that timeline. Elections will now be pushed to 2024. And what is the point of this delay? Helping Nawaz Sharif return is one part of it. The second part is sealing Imran Khan's fate. He has been jailed in a corruption case, but his appeal at the Islamabad High Court is still pending. Ideally, the army would like to remove him from the picture, make sure he's run out of options. Maybe that's why they're delaying the election. As for Nawaz Sharif, his return was always on the cards. The only question was when. His brother and former Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said September. He also said that Nawaz Sharif would be Prime Minister if they returned to power, if their party came back to power. Nawaz Sharif would be at the helm. So why hasn't he taken the flight yet? Why is he still in London? Because of legal problems. Nawaz Sharif was banned from holding public office in the year 2018. It was a lifetime ban. A ban he could not even challenge. There was no law to question the verdict of the Supreme Court in suo motu cases. What are suo motu cases? These are cases which the court takes up on its own. In such cases, the top court's decision was final, no appeals. But now that may not be the case, and I want to underline the words may not be the case. Because in the month of May, Pakistan's parliament passed a new law. It gave people the right to review verdicts in suo motu cases, meaning you can appeal. Now, technically, this would have helped Nawaz Sharif, but last week, the top court in Pakistan struck down this law. They said it's unconstitutional. So, if Nawaz Sharif returns, he faces a legal confusion. Is he still disqualified, or can he contest? Can he challenge the verdict? Or will he go to jail? There is no clarity. His brother Shehbaz Sharif has an answer. He says Nawaz Sharif will face the law and lead the party. How about that? It will be interesting to see how this unfolds in Pakistan. Shehbaz Sharif has done his bit to make his brother's return possible. He passed a law to permit judicial reviews. He also outlawed the idea of lifetime disqualifications. The new limit is now 5 years. A politician can be barred for 5 years, not more than that. Sharif has already completed 5 years. But then again, who knows? Maybe the court will strike that down too. In Pakistan, politics is like algebra, a lot of variables. But we can only be sure of two things. One, the army is buying time, whether to rig the election or to shut away Imran Khan or to bring back Shehbaz Sharif and Nawaz Sharif. They want a delay. And two, it's making a joke out of Pakistan and its people. We are talking about elections here, the most important thing in a democracy. Pakistan cannot decide when or if to hold them. And since we are talking about democracies in distress, let's look at what's happening in Niger. It's been a busy week for them. Militants have attacked Niger's armed forces. At least 17 soldiers have been killed. Meanwhile, the country has cut all diplomatic ties and is trying to forge new ones. It has recalled its ambassador from Ivory Coast. The new prime minister, appointed by the junta, has gone on a visit to Chad. A militia supporting the coup is beginning to take shape, and the junta chief in neighboring Mali is dropping cryptic hints about Russian support. I said a lot of developments. Also tomorrow, the generals of the West African bloc ECOWAS will meet in Ghana. They're expected to decide on the way forward. Will they attack Niger to force the military to reinstate the deposed president? A lot of geopolitical moves to track here. At the same time, the situation inside Niger is devolving into chaos. At this rate, powers outside Africa may soon get involved. Here's a report.
Niger's military ousted the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum on July 26th. They gave a host of justifications. One of the main ones was the failure in dealing with militant extremists. West Africa has been facing extremists for years now. The US and European nations partnered with governments in the region to combat the militants. But the militaries in Mali, Burkina Faso and now Niger became impatient. They said the democratic governments weren't doing enough and proceeded to conduct coups. Well, militancy hasn't gone away in West Africa, and it reared its ugly head again in Niger yesterday. It claimed the lives of 17 soldiers from Niger. This was near the border between Niger and Burkina Faso, barely 60 kilometers away from Niger's capital, Niamey. The junta claims it took down 100 of the attackers and that the threat was dealt with. But instability in the region is rising, caused by all the recent coups in West Africa. And it's creating the space for militants to regroup and expand. So the coups may be adding fuel to the fire. However, extremists aren't the only threat to Niger's junta. They also have to worry about a military intervention by ECOWAS. It's a regional bloc. ECOWAS is short for Economic Community of West African States. And the group threatened to invade if President Bazoum wasn't reinstated. The deadline was about 10 days ago, but ECOWAS hasn't marched on Niger yet. They've set up a standby force, and the military chiefs of ECOWAS nations are meeting tomorrow. But there's no definite sign of an impending intervention. There are three factors behind this. One is local sentiment. Nigeria currently chairs ECOWAS, and Nigerians, especially from the country's north, share close ties to the people of Niger. Leaders from northern Nigeria have been trying to prevent a conflict. They've been trying to deepen diplomatic channels between Niger's junta and Nigeria. The second factor pausing the military intervention is the West. The US and Europe are still holding out hope for a diplomatic solution. When the deadline to reinstate Bazoum expired, Germany and Italy appealed for calm. Yesterday, the US weighed in.
We remain very focused on diplomacy for achieving the results that we want, which is the return to the constitutional order. And I believe that there continues to be space for diplomacy in achieving that result.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there's still space for diplomacy. But the US also believes that the space is shrinking. And if Niger's junta goes through with its threat to prosecute President Bazoum for high treason, that diplomatic space may close completely. Niger's junta knows this, so it's been trying to gather allies. Which is the third thing preventing the military escalation. Niger's junta already has the support of Mali and Burkina Faso. Both countries saw their own coups recently, and the military dictatorships all seem to be banding together. Niger's military leaders also seem to have the tacit support of the junta in Guinea. And now they're reaching out to Chad. Chad also saw a coup recently in 2021. And yesterday, Niger's new junta-appointed prime minister went to Chad on his first state visit. So, a bloc of coup-hit nations seems to be forming. And they seem to have one thing in common: support from Russia. Mali's junta chief, Colonel Assimi Goïta, put up this post yesterday. He said he spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin over the phone. Putin wants a peaceful resolution to the Niger crisis, which means he's against the military intervention by ECOWAS. Remember, Mali and Burkina Faso got closer to Russia after their own coups. Mali even has Russia's Wagner mercenary group operating on its soil. And with his phone call, Putin showed that he has an eye on Niger as well. So these three factors, local sentiment, the Western push for diplomacy, and the support of pro-Russia juntas in West Africa, these factors have created a tense status quo in the region. So the ECOWAS generals have to think carefully. Any change to this tenuous situation may cause West Africa to erupt in war. And it's likely that the fires won't stay in the Sahel alone.
The future is electric. How many times have we heard that? Too many in the last decade. But when will that future arrive? I ask because electric vehicle companies are making a splash, and quite a big one too. The latest is VinFast. It's a Vietnamese EV maker. It is owned by the country's richest man. VinFast debuted on the Wall Street this week. It was a blockbuster debut. The company's shares closed around 270% up on Tuesday. 270%. The initial offer price was $10. It opened at $22 and it closed at $37. It is indeed a dream debut, but this story is not about VinFast, it's about the auto industry in general. How it is changing from fossil fuels to electric, that's what we want to track. Let's stick to VinFast for a bit. After Tuesday's debut, the company's market capitalization reached $85 billion. Compare that to other car makers. Ford is at $48 billion, General Motors is at $43 billion. These are the biggest car makers in the US. They mostly sell gasoline cars, but their market cap is half of VinFast. What does that tell you? The future is indeed electric. These valuations are not based on sales or profits. They're based on expectations. Expectations that the future is electric. Let me explain with an example. We will look at Tesla and Toyota. One is the largest EV maker. The other is the largest overall. How many vehicles did Toyota sell last year? Around 10.5 million. What about Tesla? Just 1 million. So Toyota's sales are 10 times more. Now let's look at profits. Toyota made $18 billion last year and Tesla around $12 billion. Toyota's market cap is around $220 billion. And Tesla is more than 3 times that. Tesla's market cap is around $715 billion. So even the market thinks that the future is electric. There are 2 reasons for that. Number 1 is climate change. Countries have committed to net zero emissions. You can't achieve those without fuel cars, or with fuel cars rather. So the plan is to phase them out. Even India is looking at doing that. A government panel has proposed banning diesel cars by 2027, but the centre is yet to accept it. If fuel cars leave the market, buyers will not have an option. It's either electric or nothing. Reason number 2 is cost. Electric vehicles are more expensive to buy, but their running cost is less. The average cost of a petrol car in India is 8 to 10 rupees per kilometre. That's the average, 8 to 10 rupees per kilometre. What about EVs? Just 1 to 2 rupees. So in the long run, you will end up saving more. You also get tax stops and subsidies for buying electric vehicles. So why aren't more people buying them? Well, if you look around, there aren't many options. That's one problem. Here in India, the average price tag of cars is around 7 lakhs. It's the national average, 7 lakh rupees. But a Tesla, if it comes to India, will cost you somewhere close to 50 lakh rupees. There is simply no comparison. The other problem is charging. You may spend around 5 to 10 minutes at the gas station, but EV charging takes a lot more. And to make things worse, there are fewer stations. India has around 7,000 EV charging stations. Compare that to petrol pumps. We have around 80,000 of them. So infrastructure is key, but chances are the world will come around. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. If you don't believe me, just look at the Germans. They're supposed to be the best car makers in the world, but even the Germans are going electric. BMW says EVs will make up 50% of their sales before 2030. Audi is launching 10 EV models by 2026, and Mercedes is planning to go 100% electric by 2030. So the writing is on the wall. Both customers and car makers realize this. In 2020, just 5% of the cars sold were EVs. In 2021, it was 9%. And last year, 14%. This is massive growth for any industry. The likes of Tesla and VinFast have a head start here, hence the higher valuation. But the traditional car makers are catching up. When they do, things will get more interesting. Will the sky-high valuations remain, or will they be cut to size? Either way, India too needs to think about EVs. We have dozens of startups focusing on this technology, but let's face it, it's a long shot. You need scale to succeed in the auto market. Some Indian companies are making an effort. Mahindra, for instance, is launching 16 EV models by 2027. Tata says half of their sales by 2030 will come from electric vehicles. The idea is to make them affordable and efficient. But all of this falls flat if the government does not get on board. There is no point using an EV if electricity is coming from a coal power plant. You need green power. You need more chargers. Only then will the future be electric. Our next story is about 50 million people, 50 million people. That's how many people live in modern slavery the world over, 50 million. Slavery by no means is a matter of the past. It continues to exist today. In fact, it's been on the rise. The number has risen by 10 million since 2018. But do you know what hasn't changed? The role of fashion in it. $148 billion worth of apparel is at the risk of being produced by forced labor. So is textile, worth $13 billion. Your favorite fashion brands know about this, yet they continue to exploit workers. The latest brand under fire for this is Ralph Lauren, the luxury fashion giant. It has been accused of using China's Uyghur forced labor. Our next report tells you more.
Now that's what you call high fashion. All of these celebrities are wearing one iconic brand, Ralph Lauren, a name that defined the so-called classic American style and now stands at the center of luxury fashion. Basically all things glitz and glamour, but who knew all of this could be a crime against humanity? That's the allegation against the fashion giant. Ralph Lauren is under investigation. Canada's corporate watchdog is probing its unit in the country over allegations of forced labor. 28 civil society organizations jointly filed a complaint last year saying the brand uses forced labor from China's Uyghur community. Now, you may remember, the Uyghurs are a minority in China. Reports say over 1 million of them have been detained in camps there. Re-education camps, the Chinese call them, where the Muslim community is exploited and abused and forced into modern slavery. Lawmakers in the West have repeatedly criticized China over it, even called for a crackdown. They call the treatment of Uyghurs in China a crime against humanity. They say it's a genocide, and they're probably not wrong. Reports say Uyghurs are tortured, forced to separate from families, and the women are forcefully sterilized. But Beijing continues to deny these accusations. No surprises there. Even so, Ralph Lauren isn't the first fashion brand accused of exploiting Uyghurs. So is Gap, Nike, Adidas, Muji, Tommy Hilfiger, and Calvin Klein. A really long list. In fact, rights groups say virtually the entire fashion industry is complicit. They all have a role to play in the exploitation of Uyghurs, who are only a small part of modern slavery today. About 50 million people are living in modern slavery today. 50 million. That's an increase of 10 million since 2018. And this number isn't limited to a few countries. It's spread across the world. But it mostly hurts those in India, Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, Thailand, Uzbekistan, and Egypt. Fashion is one of the biggest culprits, and the largest luxury brands like Louis Vuitton, Dior, Prada are allegedly the worst offenders. Every year, the world produces apparel worth $148 billion that comes from forced labor. So do textiles worth about $13 billion, which are sold by our favorite fashion brands, by household names, by luxury moguls who make big bucks off of them. But people forced into labor pay the price. They work under exploitative conditions, earn poor wages, and often go unpaid. They suffer health and safety threats, debt bondage, and risky living conditions. If it's so bad, why does it happen? For starters, forced labor is cheap. Secondly, no one is policing supply chains. There aren't enough guardrails in place. 97% of fashion brands have codes of conduct, But such policies are neither effective nor do they provide remedies. The result is ignorance and exploitation. So what can we do about it?
We know that we have to protect people against the vulnerabilities which are at the heart of forced labour. We have to improve recruitment practices so that they are fair and they are ethical. We have to reinforce labour inspection and enforcement. All of these things, we know what works, we're just not doing it enough.
There's your answer. It's easier said than done, but every worker has the right to a decent standard of living. It's barbaric to promote modern slave labour and even worse to be ignorant about it. This is 2023. For the sake of humanity, it's time slavery goes out of fashion.
For our last story tonight, let's talk about technology. No doubt it makes our lives easier. It started with a simple wheel. It helped us go from one point to another. Wheels made travel much more efficient. Using them is way better than walking with legs. No argument there. And this was centuries ago, many, many centuries ago. Since then, we have understood technology better. We have harnessed its potential and made it move forward in leaps and bounds, so much so that we have become one with technology. Now we wear tech on our body. I'm talking about wearables. Today, they're part of our lives in all shapes and sizes. Smartwatches allow people to make calls from their wrists. Body cameras and sensors help law enforcement. Augmented reality goggles provide visual information. Health trackers share real-time intelligence by monitoring high heart rates and counting the steps taken. It's clear that wearable technology is everywhere. It's the next big thing in consumer tech. Its global market is expected to reach $186 billion by 2030. Do you know what is the next big thing for the wearables market? India. It is already one of the largest markets in the world. Last year, 492 million units were shipped globally. 492 million units were sold. Out of this, India contributed about 20% of the sales. It came third after China and North America. Experts say this year, about 504 million units will be sold the world over. And India's share will account for 26%. This is tremendous growth. And this is not all talk. We are only halfway through the year and the numbers already support the trend. India's wearable market saw a growth of 53% within a year. This year, more than 57 million units have already been sold. Last year, India became the world's largest smartwatch market. But there's no stopping here. In 2022, India made up 26% of the world's smartwatch market. This year, the share is going up to 40%. And earwear has grown by about 27%, which begs the obvious question, what is behind this boom? The answer is affordability. Consumers these days care a lot about their health and sleep. They want to track how good their deep sleep was. They want to know if their heartbeat was healthy while they went for a walk. They want all this data and more for a lower price. And this helps local manufacturers in India, the likes of Boat and Noise. They're putting up a fight against international brands. They offer the same look and feel, but at a much lower cost. The result is this: Indian brands are now among the top 5 manufacturers on global wearable charts. So what are the global players doing? They're fighting back. I'm talking about Apple, Samsung and Huawei. They have increased their shipments in India. They must compete here. It is, after all, one of the largest markets in the world and only growing year after year. But so far, the international brands have failed to beat the local players. Look at the numbers. In one quarter, the average price of smartwatches has dropped by 45% in India. In 1 year, the average price of wearables has dropped by 23%. So Indian companies are in a good place. But if they want to dominate the global market, they must plan ahead. By 2030, eyewear and headwear are expected to register the second fastest growth. Remember, India already dominates the smartwatch market. But brands like Alphabet and Apple are ahead in other areas. India needs to increase adoption of virtual reality headsets, also smart hats. Another challenge is cost. So far, low prices have helped growth in India, but it also poses a problem. Prices are already at their lowest. So brands will have to differentiate themselves. They'll have to focus on research, improve accuracy, provide something new and unique to the customer. You see, when it comes to wearables, India is already close to the finish line, but the market is changing constantly. Products like smart rings will be launched soon. The consumer is ready to experiment and evolve. Indian companies will have to keep pace with them. The focus so far has been on the wrists, but to become the world's best, Indian players must take new risks. It's an exciting space to be in. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We are starting with India. Nature's fury is wreaking havoc in the state of Himachal Pradesh. Heavy rains and landslides led houses to collapse. In Spain, a massive wildfire is burning across the Canary Island. The situation on the ground has gone from bad to worse. In Italy, sudden flooding caused an alpine stream to burst its banks. 6 people have been rescued. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1977, the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, died. He was just 42 years old when he died because of a heart attack, but his melodies and his flamboyant personality lived on. We are leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.